Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. I'm continuing my Sopranos rewatch today with the third episode of Season 1, Denial, Anger, Acceptance, which originally aired on January 24th, 1999. The title here is a reference to the 5 stages of grief in the Kubler-Ross model from the 1969 book On Death and Dying. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. After the cold open in 46 Long, we're back to the intro sequence from the pilot episode. This intro sequence would remain the same until Season 4. This episode was written by Mark Saraceni and directed by Nick Gomez. It's the first episode written by someone other than David Chase, which raises an important question. Can this show maintain the momentum it built on the first 2 episodes when someone else is writing it? Let's find out. Characters. Artie and Charmaine return after being conspicuously absent in 46 Long. Here, Artie is dealing with the fallout from Tony burning down Artie's restaurant. Also, Tony calls Artie King Arthur in this episode. I always like that. For Carmela, we know from the pilot episode that Tony is seeing a Gumar, and Carmela implies that she knows he's cheating. Carm's conflict with Charmaine, in which she finds out that Charmaine slept with Tony, escalates the tension between Carmela and Tony. Tony's mother Livia is now living in Green Grove, where even Captain Teebs couldn't stop her from sinking into resentment. For Fielder. Her plotline continues her determination to get into a good college so she can get far away from New Jersey. Fielder knows what her father does for a living. The most understated thing is the obvious, though. What happens to the other 2 women in Tony's family? Carm is more or less trapped in a loveless marriage to an unfaithful man, and Fielder's grandmother was shoved off into a nursing home. A retirement community. For Fielder, her plotline continues her determination to get into a good college so she can get far away from New Jersey. This episode is also the first time we see Tony banging on the wall and yelling at one of his children to turn down their music, and for me this made Tony instantly more relatable and believable as a suburban father in 1999. Tony and Melfi continue their therapy. In 46 Long, Tony was in denial about his anger towards his mother, but here his grief and anger about losing Jackie is something he can eventually confront and accept. Mikey continues to antagonize Tony. It's ironic that Jackie compares Mikey to the Grim Reaper as part of a joke, considering how this episode ends. And the conflict between Tony and Uncle Junior reaches a boiling point. This is the first appearance of Rosaline April, Jackie's wife, played by the underrated Sharon Angela. Rosaline will continue as a regular character for most of the series, appearing in 37 episodes in total. Hillel Titleman is a minor character. He doesn't have a recurring role, though you see him later on in Season 2. He's in the executive card game episode, and I think he's briefly in Season 6. The first time I watched the show, I figured Irina was a new or different Gumar, but she's supposed to be the same character from the pilot, though in that episode she was played by Siberia M. Federico. The character Irina returns here, but she's now played by Oksana Lada for the rest of the series. This episode also has some guest stars. Ned Eisenberg as Ariel, and Chuck Lowe as Shlomo Titleman. These guest stars do an incredible job. I like the detail of Ariel calling Shlomo a control freak. And when Shlomo meets with Tony, he berates his son to not question him. Actor Chuck Lowe also adds a great detail playing Shlomo. He rearranges the sugar packets on the table to show just how obsessed Shlomo is with controlling everything. AJ and Big Puss are conspicuously absent from this episode, but they'll return later. Now it's time to talk about the plot. This episode features 5 main plot lines. Let's recap them. There's a continuation of the Comley trucking plotline from 46 Long. Brendan and Christopher return the stolen truck filled with Italian suits. They tell the Comley guys that it's a gift from Tony Soprano, which angers Uncle Junior considerably. Mikey encourages Junior to take drastic action, spurring Junior to respond with his ever-memorable, "Take it easy, we're not making a Western here." But he knows he has to do something. He talks with Livia, who encourages him to give Christopher a stern talking to, while giving the Mo Green special to Brendan. Acting boss Jackie Sr.'s cancer is knocking on death's door for him. This plot alternates between Tony visiting Jackie and his therapy sessions with Melfi. This is the primary emotional driver for this episode, since it focuses on Tony's grief over Jackie's impending death. There's also a minor subplot about Tony believing that certain paintings are part of a psychiatric conspiracy to manipulate and scam people. Tony compares them to Rorschach tests. He really means Rorschach tests, which is extremely ironic since those tests are used to reveal a subject's state of mind that they apply to an image having more meaning than the image itself. Melfi is able to effectively use Tony's interpretation of the rotting tree in the Provincetown painting to reveal his state of mind about Jackie's death, in effect using her innocuous painting as a de facto Rorschach test. It's a matter of potential interest that Provincetown, where Melfi got that painting, is in Massachusetts at the very end of the Cape Cod Peninsula, a literal geographic end of the line, while Jackie Sr. is at the literal end of the line regarding his life. Very allegorical. The sacred end of Provincetown. While visiting Jackie in the hospital, Silvio recounts an acquaintance of his, a Hasidic Jew, who needs Tony's help with the family dispute affecting his hotel business. Shlomo would normally employ a so-called goon squad to deal with this, but according to Silvio, the DA's office has shut them down. I can't help but notice how Shlomo's family and trouble mirrors the simmering conflict between Tony and Junior. And just like with Shlomo, the usual way they work out their disagreements, Jackie Sr., isn't able to help. Tony and Shlomo make a deal in which Tony will force Ariel's compliance in return for a share of Shlomo's hotel business. Convincing Ariel proves difficult, but they prevail with some out-of-the-box thinking from Hesh. Shlomo then tries to wiggle his way out of the deal he made with Tony earlier. This becomes a matter of some contention, and Shlomo realizes that his son was right to counsel him against making a deal with Tony. He's created a golem, a Frankenstein. The Artie arson subplot continues when Tony visits Artie's new house. Artie is still depressed over the loss of his restaurant, plus his insurance won't pay out. This ties into the pilot episode, in which Tony mentions how if customers stopped coming to Artie's restaurant, no insurance policy would cover that loss. Good writing is often ironic. The very outcome Tony tried to prevent for Artie occurred anyway. Tony feels guilty about this and offers Artie some startup cash. Carmela also suggests that they host a fundraiser and have Artie and Charmaine cater it. Eventually, Tony gets sick of Artie going about in pity for himself. They have a food fight and seemingly they're back to being best friends. On the other hand, Carmela and Charmaine encounter a fracture in their friendship when Carmela beckons Mamie like a servant at the fundraiser, and Charmaine reveals to Carmela later that years ago she slept with Tony. The Fielder and Hunter subplot begins as they practice for a recital and Fielder jumps her cue. They're studying for the SATs and the recital is happening on the same day. Both of them lament how they can't drop the recital, since colleges want students with extracurricular activities. Yet bombing the SATs will also severely limit their options, and Fielder wants to go to Berkeley. This draws upon Fielder's characterization from the pilot, about her wanting to be far away from New Jersey when she grows up. Going to Berkeley is a major goal for her. Fielder and Hunter can't prepare and perform both, so they conclude that they'll need speed. Not the movie from 1993, but the street drug. They visit Christopher, and after concluding that it's better for Fielder to get relatively clean drugs as opposed to a possible poison hotshot, he reluctantly supplies her with drugs, on the condition that she never tell anyone and that she never asks him again. These plotlines all converge in a Godfather-inspired montage, cutting between Fielder's recital, where she sings a solo that earns her her surname, with Tony and a cold Carmela in attendance, contrasted by Christopher getting roughed up by Junior Dispatch Russians and Mikey whacking Brendan. A very allegorical juxtaposition, the sacred end of propane. So, now it's time for some themes. What was this episode all about? Or is it all big nothing? What makes me think I'm so special? The first thing I couldn't help but notice is how the name of this episode refers to the 5 stages of grief, and how the 5 plot lines match up with them. Brendan continues to live in denial about the danger he's in, and in some ways this is a continuation of his characterization from 46 Long, whereas Christopher was very aware of the trouble he could have gotten into earlier with the failed hijacking. And here in this episode he's also acutely aware of the danger he'll be in if he sells drugs to Fielder. Both Junior and Livia are angry. Junior is angry about being disrespected as a made man in the family business. Livia is angry over what she deems to be personal mistreatment by being shoved off into a nursing home by her son. Fielder, Hunter, and Christopher all represent the bargaining aspect. The teens bargain with Christopher for drugs, and Christopher eventually bargains for his life. Artie and Carmela represent the depression of grief. Artie grieves for the loss of his restaurant business. There's an old saying that if you take away a man's millstone, you are effectively killing him, since you're taking away his livelihood and his identity. Artie's restaurant was a huge part of his life, and without it, he's incomplete. Carmela is upset, if not outright depressed, when Charmaine reveals that years ago she slept with Tony, and that it wasn't for her. This is a bit mean of Charmaine, but Carmela did rudely treat her like a servant during the fundraiser. By reflecting on her choice to not date and marry Tony, despite the opulent house the Sopranos live in, Charmaine is clearly the acceptance aspect of grief. She could have had a better life materially, but she made her decision and she doesn't regret it. The difference between Carmela and Charmaine reminded me of an image I found online regarding how depression and acceptance are not always sequential, but oftentimes different paths an individual can choose in the grieving process. Each of these characters represent a different approach to dealing with grief and loss. Charmaine happily returns to Artie, and Carmela refuses to hold Tony's hand at the recital. At the center of all of this is Tony, who experiences denial when he assures Melfi, and more likely himself, that Jackie is so tough he'll scare away that cancer. Anger when Melfi tells him Jackie's condition might be more serious than Tony is willing to admit. And I'm not sure about Tony experiencing bargaining depression within the Jackie plotline, which fits with the episode title including only 3 of the 5 stages of grief. I have sometimes wondered if Tony bringing the stripper to visit Jackie is his own way of bargaining, and if the scene where Tony is trying to tell him about the bolt cutter resolution to the Shlomo business venture while Jackie is preoccupied with his temperature is the depression stage. But I'm not really sure. Maybe those themes are explored by Tony semi-vicariously by bargaining with Shlomo and Tony trying to help Artie with his depression. But in the end, his conversation with Melfi does indicate his acceptance of losing Jackie, his longtime friend. I did make an attempt to apply a structure of thematic rectangles to the themes of this episode. One theme is denial versus acceptance, the opposite ends of the 5 stages of grief. Brendan and Christopher continue their acceptance and denial from the last episode, 46 long. Brendan is in denial about the danger he's in. He's also in denial about Hunter being interested in him, and she responds, "In your dreams." Junior is in denial about what he has to do about this situation. Christopher understands the danger he's in, both with Junior and possibly with Tony if T finds out he sold drugs to Fielder. And Mikey understands Junior's need to do something. Death is a fascinating theme to explore through the lens of a character like Tony. They frequently need to exercise some degree of control over other people, and death is something that no amount of earthly power can indefinitely stop. Jackie's death forces Tony to confront his own mortality, something he'll have to face no matter how high he moves within the Mafia hierarchy. It's fitting that this occurs right after he moves his mother into a nursing home. And when Ariel says that Shlomo is a control freak, he doesn't sound much different from Tony. They're both trying to control others with varying degrees of success. Shlomo invites Tony to solve his problem with Ariel, despite his son warning him that once he makes a deal to make Tony a business partner, he'll never be able to get rid of them. Shlomo thinks he can make a deal with the devil and control him. But Shlomo finds out the hard way that his son was right. He's created a living golem. Unbeknownst to Tony, Christopher sells drugs to his daughter. Although Christopher works for Tony, he can't be completely controlled and is able to exercise his own judgment. Christopher is a hidden golem, someone Tony thinks he can control but cannot. Jackie Sr. is acting boss, but he's sick with cancer. Everyone knows Tony is de facto boss, and Jackie has been reduced to that of a figurehead, a puppet at this point. Something else Tony isn't aware of is how bitter and angry his mother is, and how she's bending Junior's ear and manipulating him, turning her brother-in-law into a puppet she can control. It's also quite interesting that Livia defends Christopher because he installed her storm windows one summer. I wonder what Chrissy's fate would have been otherwise. Put another way, you could look at golems and puppets along the lines of family and business. In the family context, Carmela's marriage to Tony is a deal with the devil, and she thinks she can control him only to find out that he's been unfaithful. He slept with Charmaine long ago. In business, Shlomo makes a mistake-aroo thinking he can control Tony. Carmela regrets her marriage with Tony, and Shlomo regrets doing business with Tony. In terms of family, Charmaine has a great deal of influence on Artie's choices and keeps pulling him onto the honest side of the line between their family and Tony's mafia influence. I would say that Charmaine's manipulations do have a positive effect on Artie, though. At a minimum, she's well-intentioned. And in her dialogue, she literally mentions the danger of having Tony as a business partner, something Shlomo learned only too late because he ignored his son's warning, as opposed to Artie who listens to his family when they try to protect him. Death as a theme can be physical or spiritual, and characters either bargain against or accept their circumstances. In the end, Jackie seems to be accepting of the fact that he's going to physically die. Ariel learns that there's something worse than death and bargains his way out of it. Artie experiences a spiritual death with the loss of his restaurant, but eventually accepts it. For Fielder and Hunter, failing the SATs is akin to a spiritual death, and they bargain their way out of it. The subtext of the Fielder subplot shows her struggling to balance both academics with extracurriculars. Reconciling both of these responsibilities is impossible without her having to resort to drug usage. This mirrors Tony's struggle with balancing business and family, and how he can't manage to do this himself without the use of drugs, in his case, Prozac. In conclusion, the themes of this episode remind me of something Hesh says in the pilot. Man is driven in toto by his insecurities. For characters who are obsessed with control, having to face death is an existential crisis that allows for a nuanced examination of their individual choices. In terms of pop culture, there's a few memes present in this episode. Polly saying, "Hasidim, but I don't believe him." Polly also saying, "This is how I say nothing." Junior's line about, "Take it easy, we're not making a Western here." There's some other pop culture references too. Actor Chuck Lowe, who played Shlomo, played Maury in Goodfellas. This is Chuck Lowe's only guest appearance on The Sopranos. When Tony accuses Melfi of having a scam painting in her waiting room, he compares it to Rorschach tests. Typical of The Sopranos, Tony is humorously off the mark a bit. He actually means Rorschach test, which is ironically something AJ looks at later in the show when he's being tested for ADHD. Paulie refers to Ariel as Shecky Green from the Catskills. Shecky Green was an actor and comedian who was a headliner in the 1950s and 1960s. He performed in Vegas and some of the comedy clubs in the Catskills of New York back in the day. Silvio also mentions the word bupkis, which means nothing. This is derived from the Yiddish word babkas, which means goat droppings. Christopher uses the term moulignan to describe the drug dealers on Jefferson Avenue. This is a racial slur derived from the Italian, or rather the Neapolitan term, malignana, which means eggplant. Tony asks Melfi if she's Ranger Rick. Ranger Rick is from a nature magazine from the 1960s that features a cartoon character named Ranger Rick. According to the internet, it's still in print. Irina mentions she got her painting because it reminds her of David Hockney, though it sounds like she says David Hockey. Kind of like Furio's later remark about lamb chopping it, I wonder if it's mispronounced here on purpose to be funny. In any case, David Hockney is a famous painter. Irina's painting here does resemble a Hockney painting called A Bigger Splash, which was painted in 1967. Now, someone long ago, probably on Reddit, mentioned that the Big Splash painting was in some ways foreshadowing AJ's suicide attempt in Season 6. David Chase is definitely a subtle, subtext, foreshadowing creator, but I'm not sure if this was his intent at the time. Tony calls Shlomo ZZ Top. ZZ Top is a Texas band whose members have really long beards like Shlomo. When planning the fundraiser, Carmela tells Charmaine she's at 6s and 7s. This is a very old English saying that I believe comes from some sort of dice game where rolling a 6 or a 7 was a bad outcome. What's truly fascinating, though, is that the first time I heard this was from a 1993 film, The Remains of the Day. This is actually the movie that Carmela and Monsignor Jughead, Father Phil, watch in episode 5 later this season. Presumably, Carmela would be familiar with the saying from watching that film earlier, possibly when it was released in 93. This is just such an incredible degree of detail in the crafting of these characters. I'm in awe of David Chase. The end of this episode and its Godfather-inspired montage also includes the Mo Green special, another Godfather reference. In terms of the soundtrack, this episode ends with the Elvis Costello song, Complicated Shadows. And it's not just a good song, but it's also fitting given what's happening and all the manipulation going on. For the whack count, Mikey gives Brendan a Mo Green special, a shot right through the eye. He has a really good suppressor on that gun, by the way, hardly a sound. This is Mikey Gradbag Paul Macy's first on-screen kill, and the only one in this episode. For the running total, this means that there are 2 whacks, one carried over from the pilot episode and one here, and 1 manslaughter count from 46 long, and 3 deaths total so far. One of the very first conclusions that can be drawn about this excellent episode is that it's the first one not written by David Chase, and proves that the narrative foundation in terms of the characters and setting had enough momentum at this point that the show's creator didn't have to write every episode. At this point, the show has built a successful launching pad for the rest of the season, and possibly the whole series. Another aspect of the writing is how it makes use of the narrative in a way that respects the audience. Long ago, a writer friend of mine told me that when there's paint on the canvas, make broader strokes. As an example, consider Mikey's line in the hospital about a restaurant spontaneously combusting. It's a single and simple remark with a large amount of subtext. If this show were made today, I reckon they would add a scene with Tony and Silvio afterwards where they would spell out exactly what Mikey meant, re-explain why they torched Artie's restaurant, and tell each other more things that they both already know purely for the sake of duplicating exposition, even though remember when is the lowest form of conversation. But The Sopranos respects the audience and lets them read between the lines themselves. This is the first episode directed by Rick Gomez. I like the shot he chose for Tony meeting Jackie near the end, where there's all this space around Tony. Even though Jackie is there, the emphasis is on the emptiness surrounding Tony, implying that he will soon be without his friend, and perhaps implying that no matter how much material success Tony achieves, it will still leave him empty due to the mental health issues he's struggling with. His source of temporary success and inevitable failure are, in fact, the same thing. In fact, just before the ending montage, Tony asks Melfi what life is all about, and he asks, "All of this is for nothing?" This echoes Livia's later comment about it all being a big nothing. And when Melfi asks Tony if he feels like he is a Frankenstein, a monster without any feelings, it cuts to the ending montage before Tony answers, leaving us as the audience with the question so we can answer it ourselves. What also makes this episode brilliant is that at the end, two very important things have happened. There is some resolution regarding Tony's grief over Jackie. This is an early win for Melfi and Tony. The therapy can help him. At the same time, the wheels are coming off the crime family. There's a hidden parallel emerging. While Tony is a shadow prince and working as de facto boss behind the scenes, Livia is doing the same thing to Tony, working behind the scenes without his knowledge to manipulate power players to further her own goals. Brendan being whacked while the acting boss is not available to smooth things over is a guaranteed conflict between Tony and his uncle. The board is now set over a barrel of dynamite. And that's all I have for Denial, Anger, Acceptance, Season 1, Episode 3 of The Sopranos. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe! And feel free to leave a comment with your thoughts or any questions you have about this episode. I'll be continuing my rewatch with Episode 4 of Season 1, Meadowlands, and as soon as that's ready, I'll have it uploaded for y'all. So until next time, have a good one.